The first gunshot shattered the dawn's silence, sending a flock of starlings into the pale October sky as Josephine Miller clutched her 3-month-old son tighter to her chest. The second bullet splintered the doorframe above her head as she fled through the back door of her small homestead, the baby wailing against her thundering heart. Widowed before she'd even given birth, she'd learned to fear the sound of approaching horses. The year was 1875, and the Dakota Territory held no mercy for a woman alone. Josephine ran until her legs burned and her lungs ached, the weight of little Thomas growing heavier with each step. The bandits who'd attacked her home would be searching for valuables, but she knew they wouldn't stop there. She'd heard enough stories from neighboring homesteaders about what happened to women caught alone. As the morning sun climbed higher, Josephine stumbled upon a shallow creek bed. She followed it downstream, hoping the water would hide her tracks. Thomas had fallen into an exhausted sleep against her shoulder, his tiny fingers curled into the fabric of her worn cotton dress. "Hush now, my sweet boy," she whispered, though he made no sound. "We'll find somewhere safe." The creek led her to a stand of cottonwoods. Beyond them stretched open prairie, and in the distance, a thin plume of smoke rose from what looked to be a campfire. Josephine hesitated. Strangers could mean help or more danger. With no other options, she approached cautiously. As she drew closer, she could make out a single figure tending a small fire, beside which stood a magnificent chestnut stallion. A cowboy, by the look of his weathered hat and the lariat coiled at his side. Josephine paused, one hand protectively cradling Thomas's head. The man hadn't noticed her yet. She could still retreat, find another way. But Thomas stirred against her, letting out a hungry cry that carried across the open space. The cowboy's head snapped up. For a long moment, they stared at one another across the distance. Then he slowly rose to his feet, hands held open at his sides in a gesture that suggested he meant no harm. "Madam." His voice was deep, carrying easily on the morning air. "You all right?" Josephine took a hesitant step forward, then another. As she drew closer, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with a face tanned by the sun and eyes the color of the summer sky. A thin scar ran along his jawline, and several days' worth of stubble darkened his cheeks. Her voice cracked, and she realized how desperately thirsty she was. "My home was attacked. Men on horseback." The cowboy's expression darkened. He reached slowly for a canteen hanging from his saddle horn. "Name's Owen Blackwood," he said, uncorking the canteen and offering it to her. "You're safe here, madam." Josephine accepted the water gratefully, taking small sips before answering. "Josephine Miller. And this is Thomas." The baby chose that moment to let out another cry, louder and more insistent. Josephine bounced him gently, but his cries only intensified. "When's the last time you fed him?" Owen asked, his eyes kind but practical. "Before dawn," she admitted. "Before we had to run." Owen nodded, turning to rummage through his saddlebags. "I've got some jerky and hardtack. Not much of a meal, but it'll keep your strength up. For the little one." He hesitated. "My sister had a baby last year. Traveling with milk's not easy, but I reckon if you've been feeding him, you're what he needs most." A flush rose to Josephine's cheeks, but she nodded. Owen discreetly busied himself with tending the fire while she settled on a fallen log to nurse Thomas. The baby latched eagerly, his tiny hands kneading against her as he fed. "Your husband?" Owen began after a respectful silence. "Dead," Josephine said flatly. "Almost a year now. Fever took him before Thomas was born." Owen nodded, his expression somber. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Miller. Just Josephine is fine." She stroked Thomas's downy head as he nursed. "He's never known his father. Never been held by any man, in fact." Something shifted in Owen's gaze, then a flicker of sadness, perhaps, or understanding. "That's a heavy burden for you to carry alone." Josephine looked down at her son, at his perfect, tiny face relaxed in contentment as he fed. "We manage." "And now?" Owen asked quietly. "Those men who came for your place, they won't stop looking." "Not right away." Fear clenched in Josephine's stomach. She'd known this, of course, but hearing it spoken aloud made it terrifyingly real. "I don't know," she admitted. "I have a cousin in Denver, but it's so far." Owen was silent for a long moment, staring into the flames of his small fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured, as if he were choosing his words with great care. I'm headed south to Clearwater. Got a small ranch there, nothing fancy, mind you, but it's good land. Safe. He paused, glancing at her. You'd be welcome to ride with me, at least until you figure out your next move. Thomas finished nursing, and Josephine carefully shifted him to her shoulder, patting his back gently. Why would you help us? You don't know us. A faint smile touched Owen's lips. My ma raised me to believe a man who turns his back on someone in need might as well not call himself a man at all. Thomas let out a tiny burp, and Owen's smile widened. Josephine found herself studying him more carefully, the way the corners of his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the strength in his hands as he tended the fire, the gentle way he spoke. I can't pay you, she said bluntly. I'm not asking for payment. Clearwater. How far is it? 4 days' ride, maybe 5 with the little one. He nodded toward Thomas. I've got supplies enough. My horse is strong, he can carry double without complaint. Josephine considered her options, which were painfully few. Return to her homestead, where the bandits might still be waiting. Strike out alone across the prairie with a baby and no provisions? Or trust this stranger who spoke with quiet dignity and whose eyes held no malice she could detect? If you're sure it's no trouble, she finally said, then I accept your offer, Mr. Blackwood. Owen, he corrected gently. And it's no trouble at all. They set out within the hour, Owen having doused his fire and packed his meager campsite with efficient movements. Josephine sat behind him on the horse, one arm wrapped around his waist for balance, the other holding Thomas securely in a sling she'd fashioned from her shawl. The rhythm of the horse's gait soon lulled Thomas to sleep, his warm weight a comforting presence against her chest. The prairie stretched endlessly around them, the October sun warm on their backs. May I ask what brought you to these parts? Josephine ventured after they'd ridden in companionable silence for some time. Owen was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was low, almost lost beneath the sound of the horse's hooves. War, he said simply. After Appomattox, I couldn't go home. Too many ghosts. Josephine nodded, though he couldn't see her. The war had ended a decade ago, but its shadow still stretched long across the land. Her own husband, James, had been too young to fight, but his older brother had never returned from Gettysburg. And you? Owen asked. What brought you to Homestead alone in such wild country? It wasn't supposed to be alone, she answered. James and I came out from Pennsylvania 2 years ago. We had dreams of building something that would be ours, something to pass on to our children. She glanced down at Thomas's sleeping face. When he died, I could have gone back east to my parents, but this land was our dream. I couldn't abandon it. You're a brave woman, Josephine Miller. She shook her head. Not brave, just stubborn, my mother would say. Owen chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest and against her arm where it circled his waist. In my experience, there's often not much difference between the two. They made camp that evening in a sheltered hollow, Owen efficiently setting up a small tent for Josephine and Thomas while she prepared a simple meal from his provisions. As darkness fell, they sat beside the fire, Thomas awake and alert in Josephine's lap, his wide eyes reflecting the dancing flames. He has your eyes, Owen observed, passing her a tin cup of coffee. Josephine smiled, looking down at her son's face. Everyone says that, but he has his father's chin, see how strong it is. Owen nodded, his gaze lingering on the baby. May I? He hesitated, then shook his head. Never mind. What is it? Owen looked almost embarrassed. It's just, you mentioned he's never been held by a man. I thought perhaps. He trailed off, shrugging. But it's not my place. Josephine studied him for a long moment. This man who had offered safety when she needed it most, who had shared his food and water without question, who spoke of his mother's teachings with reverence. Would you like to hold him? She asked softly. Owen's eyes widened slightly. Are you sure? Instead of answering, Josephine rose and crossed the small space between them. Carefully, she placed Thomas in Owen's arms, adjusting his hands to support the baby's head properly. Owen held perfectly still, as if afraid the slightest movement might harm the precious bundle in his arms. Thomas gazed up at him solemnly, his tiny brow furrowed in concentration as he studied this new face. Hello there, little man, Owen whispered. And then, as if in response, Thomas's face broke into a gummy smile. Owen's sharp intake of breath was audible in the quiet night. He smiled at me, he said, wonder filling his voice. He likes you, Josephine replied, her heart doing a strange little flutter at the sight of her son cradled so carefully in this strong man's arms. Smart boy, Owen murmured, gently touching one finger to Thomas's tiny fist. The baby immediately grasped it, holding tight. Strong grip too. He knows who his friends are. Owen looked up then, meeting her eyes across the firelight. Something passed between them, something Josephine wasn't ready to name, but could feel nonetheless. Warm and unexpected as spring rain. I'll keep him safe, Owen said quietly. Both of you. I promise. The sincerity in his voice made her throat tight. I believe you, she whispered. Thomas began to fuss, and Josephine reached to take him back. Their hands brushed in the exchange, a brief touch that sent an unexpected warmth up her arm. Thank you for trusting me with him, Owen said, his voice rough with emotion. I know that couldn't have been easy. Josephine settled back on her side of the fire. Thomas nestled against her. Oddly enough, she replied, it was. The next morning dawned clear and cool. Josephine emerged from the small tent to find Owen already awake, coffee brewing over a fresh fire. Thomas was still sleeping, wrapped snugly in the makeshift bed Owen had fashioned from his own bedroll the night before. Sleep well? Owen asked, offering her a cup of the steaming coffee. Better than I expected, she admitted, accepting the cup gratefully. Thank you. They ate a simple breakfast of hardtack softened in coffee and the last of Owen's jerky. As they packed up camp, Owen seemed preoccupied, his brow furrowed in thought. Something wrong? Josephine asked as they prepared to mount his horse. Owen hesitated, then nodded toward the horizon. Storm coming. See those clouds there? Moving fast. He glanced at Thomas, who was awake now and gurgling happily in Josephine's arms. We should find better shelter before it hits. Is there a town nearby? No town, but there's an old line shack about 10 miles south. Used it myself once or twice. Not much to look at, but it's solid. They rode harder that day, the approaching storm driving them forward. By mid-afternoon, the sky had darkened ominously, and the wind had picked up, bringing with it the scent of rain. The line shack appeared just as the first fat droplets began to fall. A small, weathered structure nestled against a stand of pines. Owen quickly unsaddled his horse and led it to a lean-to attached to the shack, while Josephine hurried inside with Thomas. The interior was basic but clean, a small iron stove in one corner, a narrow cot against the wall, a rough-hewn table with a single chair. Owen followed her in, arms laden with his saddlebags and bedroll. Not exactly the Palmer house, he said wryly, setting down his belongings. It's perfect, Josephine assured him, genuinely grateful for the solid roof as rain began to pelt against it in earnest. Owen built a fire in the stove while Josephine tended to Thomas, changing his diaper and soothing him as the storm's noise made him fretful. Outside, the wind howled, and rain lashed against the small windows. Looks like we might be here a while, Owen observed, peering out at the darkening sky. This storm feels like it's settling in. He was right. The storm raged through the afternoon and into the evening, showing no signs of abating. They shared a meal of beans Owen found in the shack's meager stores, supplemented with biscuits he skillfully prepared in a small skillet over the stove. Where did you learn to cook? Josephine asked, impressed by the light, flaky texture of the biscuits. Owen smiled, a distant look in his eyes. My mother taught me the basics. Said no son of hers would go hungry for lack of knowing how to feed himself. The rest I picked up on cattle drives. You spend enough time watching a good chuck wagon cook, you learn a few tricks. As the evening wore on, the small shack grew cozy with warmth from the stove. Thomas, full from nursing and fascinated by the new surroundings, was unusually alert, his eyes tracking Owen's movements with apparent interest. I think he wants you to hold him again, Josephine said, noticing how Thomas's gaze followed Owen around the small space. Owen looked surprised but pleased. Is that right, little man? Want to spend some time with me while your mama rests a bit? This time, when Josephine handed Thomas over, Owen took him with more confidence, cradling him easily in one arm. He sat in the single chair, speaking softly to the baby, who stared up at him with rapt attention. What are you telling him? Josephine asked, settling onto the cot with a grateful sigh. Her muscles ached from the long ride and the tension of the past 2 days. "Oh, just man talk," Owen replied with a wink. "About horses and cattle and how to tie a proper lariat, not things his mama probably thinks he's too young for." Josephine laughed, the sound surprising her. It had been so long since she'd had reason to laugh. "I suppose every boy needs to learn those things eventually." "That they do." Owen gently bounced Thomas, who gurgled happily in response. "Though I reckon with a mother like you, he'll learn plenty of important things without my help." "Like what?" "Courage, for one," Owen said seriously. "Determination. Loyalty to what matters." His eyes met hers across the small space. "You stayed with that homestead even after losing your husband. Takes a special kind of strength to face each day alone like that." Josephine looked down, suddenly unable to hold his gaze. "I wasn't always strong," she admitted quietly. "After James died, there were days I couldn't even get out of bed. If I hadn't been carrying Thomas." She trailed off, the memory of those dark days still painful. "But you did get up," Owen said gently. "And you kept going. That's what counts in the end." Thomas began to fuss, his little face scrunching up in preparation for a cry. Owen looked momentarily alarmed. "Here, I'll take him," Josephine said, rising from the cot. "He's probably hungry again." Owen carefully handed Thomas back, their hands brushing once more in the exchange. This time, Josephine was certain she wasn't imagining the lingering touch or the way Owen's eyes darkened slightly as they met hers. "I'll step outside for a bit," he said, his voice rougher than before. "Check on the horse." "But the storm, I'll stay under the lean-to," he assured her, already reaching for his coat. "Give you some privacy." After he'd gone, Josephine settled back on the cot to nurse Thomas, listening to the storm rage outside and thinking about the man who had so unexpectedly entered their lives. There was a gentleness to Owen Blackwood that belied his rugged exterior, a kindness in his eyes when he looked at Thomas, a respect in his manner when he spoke to her. It had been so long since she'd allowed herself to notice such things about a man. After James died, she'd been consumed first by grief, then by the all-encompassing responsibility of preparing for her child's birth and keeping their homestead running. There had been no room for noticing the breadth of a man's shoulders or the warmth of his smile. Yet here she was, acutely aware of both those things and more about Owen. When he returned, damp from the rain despite the shelter of the lean-to, Josephine had finished nursing and had settled Thomas on the cot beside her. The baby was drowsy, his eyelids drooping as he fought against sleep. "Horse is fine," Owen reported, shrugging out of his wet coat. "Storm's still going strong, though? We'll likely be here through tomorrow." Josephine nodded, trying to ignore the small thrill that ran through her at the thought of another day in this snug shelter with him. That's probably for the best. The trail would be mud anyway. Owen hung his coat near the stove to dry, then stood somewhat awkwardly in the middle of the small room, as if unsure where to place himself. "You should take the cot," he finally said. "You and Thomas. I'll be fine on the floor." Josephine glanced at the narrow cot, then at the hard plank floor. "That doesn't seem fair. You've already given up your bedroll for Thomas." Owen shrugged. "I've slept on worse." "At least share the cot," she suggested, then immediately felt heat rush to her face at the implication. "I mean, Thomas is small, and there's room for both of us if we're careful." Owen's eyes widened slightly, but he shook his head. "Wouldn't be proper, madam." "Proper?" Josephine couldn't help but laugh. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm a widow alone in a line shack with a strange man during a thunderstorm. I think proper left the conversation some time ago." A slow smile spread across Owen's face. "When you put it that way." In the end, they compromised. Owen laid his bedroll on the floor beside the cot, close enough that Josephine could reach down and touch him if she extended her hand, but maintaining a respectful distance that preserved what little propriety remained in their unusual situation. As the storm continued to rage outside, they talked in low voices, careful not to wake Thomas, who had finally surrendered to sleep. Owen told her of his ranch in Clearwater, 200 acres of good grazing land with a creek running through it, a small but sturdy house he'd built himself, a herd of 30 cattle he was slowly building up. "It's not much," he said, "but it's mine, free and clear." "It sounds wonderful," Josephine replied sincerely. "To build something from nothing. That's what James and I hope to do." "And what about you?" Owen asked after a moment's silence. What will you do now? After Clearwater, I mean. Josephine sighed, stroking Thomas's soft hair as he slept beside her. I don't know. I could try to rebuild the homestead, but I'm tired of being afraid, she admitted quietly. Tired of jumping at every sound, wondering if today is the day someone decides a woman alone is an easy target. She looked down at her son. He deserves better than that. Better than a mother who can't sleep at night for fear. Owen was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was so low she had to strain to hear it over the rain. You could stay, he said simply. In Clearwater. Josephine's heart skipped a beat. Stay. My nearest neighbor is 3 miles away. The town's small but decent. There's a school, a church. He paused. Could be a good place to raise a boy. And where would we live? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Owen hesitated, and in the dim light from the stove, she could see a flush creeping up his neck. There's a small cabin on my property, used to belong to the previous owner's foreman. It's simple, but sound. You could stay there, at least until you decide what you want to do next. And in return, what would you expect from me? Nothing you're not willing to give, he answered immediately, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Josephine, I'm not offering because I expect something. I'm offering because. He trailed off, searching for words. Because when that little boy smiled at me yesterday, something changed. And when you trusted me enough to let me hold him, to let me help you both, I felt like maybe I was where I was supposed to be. He ran a hand through his hair, looking suddenly vulnerable. I know it sounds crazy. We've only just met. But sometimes you just know. Josephine's throat tightened with emotion. Owen, you don't have to answer now, he said quickly. Just think about it. Please. She nodded, unable to trust her voice. Owen seemed to understand, offering her a gentle smile before rolling onto his side, his back to her. Good night, Josephine, he said softly. Good night, Owen, she whispered back, her mind whirling with possibilities she hadn't dared consider until now. The storm continued through the night and into the next day, confining them to the small shack. What might have been an uncomfortable confinement instead became a gentle unfolding as they learned each other's rhythms and stories. Owen proved remarkably adept with Thomas, fashioning a makeshift cradle from his saddlebags and a blanket, and volunteering to hold the baby whenever Josephine needed a moment to rest or attend to her own needs. There was something about watching this strong, capable man cradling her son with such tenderness that made Josephine's heart ache in a way that was both painful and sweet. You're good with him, she observed as Owen patiently walked Thomas around the small space, the baby fussing slightly from being confined indoors. Owen smiled down at the infant in his arms. He makes it easy. Smart little fellow. Knows exactly what he wants. And what's that? Attention, Owen replied with a chuckle. Just like his mama. Josephine raised an eyebrow. I don't recall asking for your attention, Mr. Blackwood. Didn't have to, he said, his eyes twinkling. Some things a man just knows. The easy banter between them grew throughout the day, punctuated by quiet moments of shared tasks and care for Thomas. By evening, when the storm finally began to subside, leaving only a gentle rain pattering against the roof, Josephine realized with a start that she felt more at ease with Owen than she had with anyone since James died. As they sat together near the stove, Thomas sleeping peacefully in his makeshift cradle, Josephine found herself studying Owen's profile in the soft light, the strong line of his jaw, the slight crinkle at the corner of his eye, the way his hands, rough from years of hard work, could be so gentle when they touched her son. Tell me about your ranch again, she said softly. Owen glanced at her, a question in his eyes. What would you like to know? Everything. What the house looks like. What you grow in your garden. Where the sun rises in the morning. A slow smile spread across his face. The house isn't much to look at, just 4 rooms and a porch. But the porch faces east, so the sunrise comes right through the front windows, turning everything gold for about an hour. He paused, his eyes taking on a distant look. The garden's small, but good soil. Had tomatoes and corn this year, some beans. Planning to expand it next spring. And the cabin you mentioned? The foreman's cabin. It's about a 1/4 mile from the main house, near the creek. 1 room with a loft, stone fireplace. Needs some fixing up, new roof, maybe, and the door sticks in wet weather. But it's solid. He hesitated. Be nice, having a woman's touch around the place. Flowers, maybe, or curtains at the windows. Josephine's heart quickened. I've always been partial to sunflowers, she said quietly. And blue curtains. Owen's eyes met hers, hope dawning in their depths. Sunflowers would do well there. Soil's right for it. And Thomas? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Where would he fit in this picture of yours? Owen's gaze shifted to the sleeping baby, and his expression softened. Everywhere, he said simply. He'd have the run of the place. Learn to ride as soon as he's big enough. Fish in the creek. Help with the cattle when he's older. He looked back at Josephine, something vulnerable and earnest in his face. I'd teach him everything I know. Be there for him. For both of you. You hardly know us. Josephine reminded him, though the words lacked conviction. I know enough, Owen replied. I know you're brave and strong, and love that boy more than life itself. I know he's got your smile and his daddy's chin and the sweetest laugh I've ever heard. He paused, then added softly, and I know that when I think about riding away from you both once we reach Clearwater, it feels like leaving something precious behind. Josephine's breath caught in her throat. Owen, I'm not asking for promises, he said quickly. Just a chance. Stay at the cabin. Let me prove that what I'm feeling isn't just because of these past 2 days. Let me show you and Thomas what life could be like. Outside, the rain had stopped, and a sliver of moon peeked through a break in the clouds, casting a shaft of silver light through the small window. In that light, Owen's face was open, vulnerable, hopeful. Josephine thought of her homestead, now likely ransacked and possibly burned. She thought of the long, lonely nights she'd spent there, jumping at every sound. She thought of Thomas growing up without a man's guidance, without someone to teach him the things a father should. And then she thought of sunflowers by a creek, blue curtains in windows, and the sound of a child's laughter mixing with the low rumble of Owen's voice. All right, she said softly. We'll stay? For a while. The smile that broke across Owen's face was like sunrise after the storm, brilliant and full of promise. Without thinking, Josephine reached out, her hand finding his across the small space between them. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong and steady. I'll hold him forever, you know, Owen said quietly, his gaze moving to the sleeping Thomas. If you'll let me. Both of you. Josephine's eyes filled with unexpected tears. I believe you will, she whispered. Morning brought clear skies and a world washed clean by the storm. They set out early, eager to make up for the lost day. Thomas, seemingly invigorated by the fresh air, was unusually content, watching the passing landscape with wide, curious eyes from his sling. The trail south was muddy but passable, and Owen set a steady pace, careful not to jostle his precious cargo. Josephine found herself growing accustomed to the rhythm of riding double, to the solid warmth of Owen's back against her chest, to the casual way his hand would sometimes cover hers where it rested at his waist. They made good time that day and the next, stopping each night to make camp in sheltered spots Owen seemed to know instinctively. Each evening, the three of them fell into an easy routine, Owen tending to the horse and fire, Josephine caring for Thomas, then a shared meal and quiet conversation as night descended. And each night, Owen would hold Thomas, sometimes singing softly to him in a surprisingly melodious baritone, old songs Josephine half remembered from her own childhood. The baby clearly adored him, his tiny face lighting up whenever Owen spoke or reached for him. On the afternoon of the 4th day since leaving her homestead, they crested a gentle rise, and Owen reined in his horse. There it is, he said, a note of pride in his voice. Clearwater. Below them, a small valley opened up, bisected by a winding creek that glittered in the late afternoon sun. Nestled against a stand of cottonwoods was a modest house with a wide porch, just as Owen had described. Nearby stood a barn and corral, and in the distance, she could make out the smaller shape of what must be the foreman's cabin he'd mentioned. It's beautiful, Josephine said sincerely, taking in the peaceful scene. Owen glanced back at her, a smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. It's home, he said simply. They rode down into the valley, the horse picking up its pace as if sensing the proximity of its stable and feed. As they approached the main house, Josephine felt a flutter of nervousness. This was Owen's domain, his private world that he was inviting them into. What if, now that they were here, he regretted his impulsive offer? But when they dismounted in front of the house, Owen's expression contained nothing but genuine pleasure as he helped her down, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. "Welcome to Blackwood Ranch," he said, a hint of shyness in his smile. Thomas chose that moment to let out a demanding cry, and the tension broke as they both laughed. "Someone wants to inspect his new surroundings," Josephine said, adjusting the sling to give Thomas a better view. "Can't say I blame him," Owen replied, reaching out to gently touch the baby's cheek. "It's a lot to take in." He showed them around the main house, first a simple but well-built structure with a large central room that served as both kitchen and living area, and 3 smaller rooms off to one side. The furniture was basic but sturdy, much of it clearly handmade. "It's not fancy," Owen said, a hint of apology in his voice as he watched Josephine take in the sparse furnishings. "It's perfect," she assured him, genuinely impressed by the tidiness and order of the place. For a man living alone, Owen kept a remarkably clean house. After the tour, Owen insisted on preparing a proper meal, venison stew that had been simmering in a Dutch oven since before he'd left on his journey, supplemented with fresh biscuits he quickly mixed and baked in the cast-iron stove. They ate at the kitchen table, Thomas dozing in a nest of blankets Owen had arranged in a wooden crate that served as a makeshift cradle. The food was simple but delicious, and Josephine found herself relaxing into the domesticity of the scene, the warm kitchen, the good food, Owen's attentive presence across the table. "Tomorrow I'll show you the cabin," Owen said as they washed the dishes together afterward, his sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing strong forearms tanned by the sun. "Get you and Thomas settled in." Josephine nodded, suddenly hesitant. Now that they had reached clear water, the enormity of what she had agreed to settled over her. She was putting her trust and Thomas's future in the hands of a man she had known for less than a week. Owen seemed to sense her uncertainty. "Josephine," he said gently, setting down the plate he was drying, "I meant what I said back at the line shack. No expectations. The cabin is yours for as long as you want it. If you decide Clearwater isn't where you want to be, I'll help you get wherever you need to go." The sincerity in his eyes eased some of the tightness in her chest. "Thank you," she said softly. "It's not that I don't trust you. It's just a lot," he finished for her. "I know. For what it's worth, I'm nervous too." This surprised her. "You are?" A faint flush colored his cheeks. "Course I am. Got a beautiful woman and her baby coming to live on my land. What if you hate it here? What if I say or do the wrong thing and mess it all up?" The vulnerability in his admission touched her deeply. Impulsively, she reached out and covered his hand with hers where it rested on the edge of the sink. "We'll figure it out together," she said. "One day at a time." Owen turned his hand over, his fingers intertwining with hers. "I'd like that very much," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. That night, Josephine slept in Owen's bed at his insistence, while he took a pallet on the floor of the main room. Thomas, exhausted from the journey, slept more soundly than he had in days, nestled beside her in the soft comfort of a real bed. As she drifted toward sleep, Josephine found herself thinking about the path that had led her here, the tragedy of losing James, the struggle to survive alone, the terrifying attack that had driven her from her home. Through all of it, she had focused solely on survival, on keeping Thomas safe. Now, for the first time in longer than she could remember, she allowed herself to think beyond mere survival, to imagine a future that held more than just getting through each day, a future with friendship, security, and perhaps, in time, something deeper. The thought should have frightened her. Instead, as sleep claimed her, she found herself smiling into the darkness. The next morning, Owen took them to see the foreman's cabin. It was exactly as he had described, a simple one-room structure with a sleeping loft above, situated near a bend in the creek where willows dipped their branches into the clear water. "Roof sound," Owen said as he pushed open the door, which did indeed stick slightly. "Chimney draws well." Previous owner left some furniture, bed frame in the loft, table, couple of chairs. Josephine stepped inside, Thomas secure in her arms. The cabin was dusty from disuse, cobwebs festooning the corners, but she could immediately see its potential. Large windows on 2 walls would provide good light. The stone fireplace was well built, and would heat the small space effectively. A rough counter ran along one wall, with shelves above it for storage. "What do you think?" Owen asked, watching her expression carefully. Josephine turned slowly, taking it all in. "It needs a woman's touch," she said with a smile, "but it's lovely." Truly. Relief washed over Owen's face. "We can clean it up today, move you in by evening. I've got linens at the house for the bed, and plenty of supplies to get you started." They spent the day transforming the cabin, working side by side to sweep away dust and cobwebs, scrub floors and windows, and arrange the simple furniture to best advantage. Owen brought over a rocking chair from the main house, been sitting and used in the spare room, and positioned it near the fireplace. By late afternoon, the cabin was unrecognizable. Clean windows let in the golden light of the setting sun. Fresh bedding covered the mattress in the loft. A fire crackled cheerfully in the hearth, driving away the last of the damp. On the table, a mason jar held a bouquet of late wildflowers Owen had gathered from near the creek. "One last thing," Owen said, disappearing outside only to return moments later with a small wooden crate. He set it down near the rocking chair and stepped back, looking suddenly shy. "For Thomas." Josephine peered into the crate to find a beautifully crafted cradle, small enough to fit beside a bed but sturdy and well-made, with smooth sides and rockers on the bottom. "Owen," she breathed, running her hand along the polished wood. "It's beautiful. Did you make this?" He nodded, rubbing the back of his neck. "Started it after my sister's baby was born. Thought I'd give it to her when I visited next, but—" He glanced at Thomas, who was watching the exchange from his place on a blanket spread near the fire. "Seems like he needs it more." Overwhelmed by the gesture, Josephine could only nod, tears pricking at her eyes. Owen quickly misinterpreted her emotion. "If you don't like it, no," she interrupted, finding her voice. "It's perfect. I just—" "Thank you. For everything." Their eyes met across the small space, and something shifted between them, a recognition, perhaps, of the connection that had been building since that first moment by the creek. The moment was broken by Thomas, who let out a demanding cry from his blanket. Josephine laughed, wiping away the moisture from her eyes as she moved to pick him up. "Someone's feeling left out of the conversation," she said, lifting the baby into her arms. Owen smiled, the tension easing from his shoulders. "Can't have that. Not when he's the most important person here." That evening, after a simple supper at the main house, Owen walked them back to the cabin, carrying a lantern to light their way through the gathering darkness. At the door, he hesitated. "Will you be all right here?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "I can stay at the main house if you need anything, just fire a shot, and I'll come running." Josephine shook her head, touched by his protectiveness but determined to establish their independence. "We'll be fine. The cabin is perfect, and Thomas and I are used to managing on our own." Owen nodded, though she could see the reluctance in his eyes. "All right then. I'll come by in the morning, help you get settled in properly. We'd like that." He reached out then, his hand gently touching her cheek in a gesture so tender it made her breath catch. "Good night, Josephine," he said softly. "Sleep well." Before she could respond, he turned and walked away, the lantern's light receding into the darkness as he headed back toward the main house. Inside the cabin, Josephine prepared Thomas for bed, marveling at how quickly the small space already felt like home. The cradle Owen had made fit perfectly beside the bed in the loft, and Thomas settled into it with contented sighs, his eyes heavy with sleep. As she lay in her own bed later, listening to her son's soft breathing and the gentle sounds of the night outside, the creek's murmur, the occasional call of an owl, the whisper of wind in the willows, Josephine found herself thinking of Owen, of his kindness and strength, his gentle way with Thomas, the look in his eyes when he'd touched her cheek. It was too soon, she told herself firmly. Too soon after James, too soon after meeting Owen, too soon to be thinking of anything beyond friendship and the practical arrangement they had made. Yet as she drifted toward sleep, it was Owen's smile that followed her into dreams. The days that followed established a gentle rhythm to their new life. Each morning, Owen would come to the cabin, bringing fresh eggs or milk from the cow he kept, sometimes staying to share breakfast with them. During the day, he attended to the ranch work while Josephine settled into making the cabin truly their own, hanging the blue curtains Owen had ridden into town to purchase. Planting the late-season vegetables, he helped her add to the small garden plot behind the cabin, arranging the few possessions she had brought with her from the homestead. In the evenings, they often shared supper, sometimes at the cabin, sometimes at the main house. After Thomas was put to bed, they would sit together by the fire, talking long into the night about everything and nothing: their childhoods, their dreams, the books they had read, the places they had seen. Owen, she discovered, was a man of surprising depths. Beneath the quiet exterior was a keen intelligence and a dry wit that often caught her by surprise, making her laugh when she least expected it. He had a talent for storytelling, painting vivid pictures with his words that transported her to cattle drives across the open prairie, to mountain passes where the air was so clear it hurt to breathe, to desert nights so full of stars it seemed the sky might crack under their weight. As October gave way to November, bringing frost to the mornings and earlier sunsets, Josephine found herself looking forward to those evening conversations more and more. There was an ease between them now, a comfortable familiarity that felt both novel and somehow as if it had always been there, waiting to be discovered. Thomas, too, was thriving in their new home. At 4 months, he was growing stronger every day, his personality emerging in gummy smiles and curious eyes that followed Owen's every movement when he was near. For his part, Owen seemed endlessly fascinated by the baby's development, delighting in each new skill Thomas mastered, each new sound he made. "He's trying to roll over," Owen observed one evening as they watched Thomas on a blanket near the fire, the baby struggling to push himself onto his side. "Look at that determination." Josephine nodded, smiling at her son's focused expression. "He's stubborn. Gets that from his father." A shadow passed briefly over Owen's face at the mention of James. It was gone so quickly Josephine almost thought she had imagined it, but it left her wondering about the complicated emotions that must lie beneath Owen's calm exterior. "Owen," she said carefully, "does it bother you when I mention James?" He looked up, surprise evident in his expression. "No," he said after a moment's consideration. "Why would it? He was Thomas's father, your husband. He'll always be part of who you both are. Some men might find that difficult." Owen's gaze was steady, his voice quiet but firm. "I'm not some men. James gave you Thomas. Gave you both life. How could I resent that?" The simple wisdom of his words touched her deeply. In that moment, something shifted within Josephine, a loosening of the grief that had bound her heart since James's death, a recognition that honoring his memory and opening herself to new possibilities were not mutually exclusive. Before she could respond, Thomas succeeded in his efforts, rolling onto his side with a look of such startled triumph that both adults burst into laughter. "Well done, little man," Owen exclaimed, reaching down to gently ruffle the baby's soft hair. "Your mama and I knew you could do it. Your mama and I." The casual phrase hung in the air between them, laden with meaning neither was quite ready to acknowledge. Later that night, after Owen had returned to the main house and Thomas was asleep in his cradle, Josephine stood at the cabin window, looking out at the sliver of moon rising over the distant hills. The words echoed in her mind, stirring feelings she had kept carefully contained since arriving at Blackwood Ranch. Your mama and I, as if they were a family, as if Owen had a right to claim some part in Thomas's achievements, some role in his life beyond that of a kind neighbor. And the truth, Josephine admitted to herself as she gazed out at the peaceful night, was that Owen had earned that right. In the weeks since they had arrived at Clearwater, he had become an essential part of their lives not just through his generosity and practical help, but through the genuine love he showed for Thomas and the respectful care with which he treated Josephine herself. It would be so easy to let herself fall in love with him. Perhaps, she thought with a mixture of wonder and trepidation, she already had. The realization should have frightened her. Instead, it settled over her with the quiet certainty of something long known but only now acknowledged. The first snow of the season came in late November, blanketing the valley in white and transforming Blackwood Ranch into a winter wonderland that took Josephine's breath away. She stood at the cabin door that morning, Thomas bundled warmly in her arms, watching as the fat flakes drifted down from a pearl gray sky. Owen appeared through the curtain of snow, his broad shoulders dusted white, his breath visible in the cold air. He carried an armload of firewood and a basket that she knew would contain breakfast provisions. "Morning," he called, his smile bright against the monochrome landscape. "Thought you might need extra wood. Going to be a cold one." Josephine stepped back to let him enter, the warmth from the cabin's fire creating a cloud of steam around him as he stomped the snow from his boots. Thomas gurgled excitedly at the sight of him, reaching out with eager hands. "Someone's happy to see you," Josephine observed, smiling as Owen set down his burdens and reached for the baby. "Feelings mutual, little man," Owen replied, lifting Thomas high before settling him against his chest. "Been thinking about you all night. Got big plans for us today." "Oh." Josephine raised an eyebrow as she began unpacking the basket: fresh bread, a crock of butter, eggs, a jar of preserves. "And what might those be?" Owen's eyes twinkled. "Thomas's first snow, of course. Can't let such an important occasion pass without proper celebration." After breakfast, they bundled Thomas in layers of warm clothing, wrapping him in a small blanket Owen had brought from the main house. "My mother made it for me when I was born." Thomas got some use again. Together, they took the baby outside, where Owen had cleared a small area in front of the cabin. "Now," Owen said seriously to Thomas, who stared wide-eyed at the white world around him. "Snow is a very important part of life out here. Good for the land, good for the crops. Makes everything clean and new." He bent down, scooping up a handful of the powdery snow. "And it's also good for this." With a mischievous grin, he tossed the snow lightly into the air, letting it shower down around them like diamond dust. Thomas's eyes grew impossibly wider, and then, to Josephine's delight, he let out a laugh, a real laugh, his first, a sound like silver bells that rang out in the crisp air. Owen looked up at Josephine, his face alight with joy. "Did you hear that?" He laughed. Josephine nodded, her heart so full she couldn't speak. This moment, her son's first laugh, shared with this man who had come to mean so much to them, both felt somehow sacred, a memory she would carry with her always. Owen scooped up more snow, repeating the trick, and Thomas laughed again, his tiny body wriggling with excitement in Josephine's arms. "I think we have a snow enthusiast on our hands," Owen said, his voice warm with affection. They stayed outside only a short while longer, mindful of the cold and Thomas's tender age, but the magic of the moment lingered as they returned to the cabin's warmth. Owen built up the fire while Josephine removed Thomas's outer layers, the baby still excited from his new experience. As she settled into the rocking chair to nurse Thomas, Owen moved toward the door. "I should get back to the chores," he said, though she could see his reluctance to leave. "Cattle need extra attention in this weather." "Will you come for supper?" Josephine asked, surprising herself with the eagerness in her voice. Owen's smile softened. "Try and stop me," he replied. After he had gone, Josephine sat rocking Thomas, watching the snow continue to fall outside the window, thinking about the path that had led her here and the future stretching before them. In just over a month, Clearwater had become home in a way her homestead never had. The cabin, with its blue curtains and crackling fire, the creek with its constant gentle song, the valley with its changing moods and colors, all had worked their way into her heart. And Owen, with his quiet strength and unexpected tenderness, had become essential. That evening, as they sat together at the cabin's small table, sharing a hearty stew Josephine had prepared, the firelight casting warm shadows on the walls, Owen seemed preoccupied, his usual easy conversation replaced by thoughtful silence. "Is something wrong?" Josephine finally asked, watching as he absently broke a piece of bread into smaller and smaller pieces without eating it. Owen looked up, startled from his thoughts. "No. Yes. I mean," he sighed, setting down the mangled bread. "I've been thinking about Christmas," he said, then quickly amended. "Well, not just Christmas. Everything, really. The future." He took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "Josephine, these past weeks with you and Thomas here, they've been the happiest of my life." Josephine's heart began to beat faster. "They've been wonderful for us too," she said softly. "The thing is," Owen continued, his eyes meeting hers across the table, "I can't imagine going back to how it was before. The ranch was just a place before you came. Now it's a home. He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. You've made it a home. Josephine turned her hand over, her fingers intertwining with his. Owen, please, he interrupted gently. Let me finish before I lose my nerve. He took another deep breath. I know it hasn't been long. I know you're still healing from losing James. And I know Thomas is your priority, as he should be. His grip on her hand tightened slightly. But I love you, Josephine. Both of you. And I want to be more than just your neighbor or your friend. The words hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable and hopeful. Josephine felt tears prick at her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming emotion that welled up within her. I've been afraid to say it, Owen continued, his voice rougher now. Afraid it was too soon, that you weren't ready, that I'd scare you away. But today, watching you with Thomas in the snow, seeing how he's growing, how quickly time is passing. He shook his head slightly. I couldn't keep it inside anymore. Josephine stood then, moving around the table without releasing his hand, drawing him to his feet before her. In the firelight, his eyes were the color of a summer sky at dusk, full of hope and fear and love. I love you too, she whispered, the words coming easily, naturally, as if she had been saying them all her life. I think I have since that first night by the campfire, when you held Thomas and promised to keep us safe. The smile that broke across Owen's face was like sunrise, brilliant and full of promise. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down, his lips meeting hers in a kiss so gentle it made her heart ache. His hands came up to frame her face, his touch reverent as his thumbs brushed away the tears she hadn't realized were falling. When they broke apart, Owen rested his forehead against hers, his breathing unsteady. I want to be a father to Thomas, he said quietly. A husband to you, if you'll have me. From his cradle near the fire, Thomas let out a soft coo, as if adding his approval to the proceedings. They both laughed, the sound mingling in the warm air between them. I think that's a yes from him, Josephine said, smiling through her tears. And it's a yes from me too. Owen kissed her again, deeper this time, his arms encircling her waist and drawing her against him. Josephine melted into his embrace, feeling as if she had finally found her way home after a long journey. Later, as they sat together before the fire, Thomas sleeping peacefully in Owen's arms, they spoke of practical matters of marriage and legalities, of the cabin and the main house, of the future they would build together. We could be married by Christmas, Owen suggested, his voice soft so as not to wake the baby. There's a preacher comes through Clearwater every few weeks. Or we could ride into the county seat if you prefer something more formal. Josephine shook her head, smiling at his eagerness. Christmas would be perfect. Simple and quiet, here at the ranch with just us. Owen nodded, his expression thoughtful. And after? Would you want to move to the main house? We could expand it, add more rooms as needed. He glanced around the cabin. Or we could stay here, if you prefer. Make the main house into storage or guest quarters. The consideration in his offer touched Josephine deeply. The main house, she said after a moment's thought. It's your home, our home now. But maybe we could keep the cabin too. For when Thomas is older, perhaps, or for guests. Whatever you want, Owen agreed readily. He looked down at Thomas, sleeping trustingly in his arms. I meant what I said that first day, you know, about holding him forever. Josephine leaned against his shoulder, content in a way she had never thought possible again after losing James. I know you did. It's one of the reasons I love you. As December unfolded, bringing more snow and preparations for both Christmas and their wedding, Josephine found herself reflecting often on the strange, winding path that had led her to this happiness. The attack on her homestead, terrifying as it had been, had driven her directly into Owen's path. Without that moment of danger and desperation, they might never have met. Life, she was learning, had a curious way of bringing blessings disguised as hardships. The wedding took place on Christmas Eve, just as they had planned. The preacher, a kindly older man named Reverend Johnson, rode out from Clearwater despite the snow, bringing with him his wife who fussed over Thomas and pronounced him the handsomest baby in the territory. They were married in the main house, before the fireplace decked with pine boughs and red ribbons. Josephine wore a simple blue dress Owen had insisted on buying when they had ridden into town the week before. Thomas, dressed in a tiny white shirt and knitted booties, watched the proceedings from the arms of Mrs. Johnson, his eyes wide with interest at the gathering. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, the ancient words taking on new meaning as they were spoken in the warm glow of the firelight, surrounded by the home they would share. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Johnson declared, beaming at them both. "Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood." Owen's kiss was gentle but filled with promise, his hands warm and steady as they held hers. When they turned to face the Johnsons, Mrs. Johnson stepped forward with Thomas. "I believe this young man would like to congratulate his parents," she said, her eyes twinkling as she handed Thomas to Owen. Owen took the baby with practiced ease, cradling him between himself and Josephine. "What do you think, little man?" he asked softly. "Your mama's made an honest man of me at last." Thomas responded with a gurgle and a toothless smile that made them all laugh. In that moment, looking at her son in the arms of the man she loved, Josephine felt a perfect contentment that she had once thought lost to her forever. After the Johnsons had departed, laden with thanks and Christmas gifts, Owen, Josephine, and Thomas shared their first meal as a family in their home. The table was festive with candles and the best china Owen owned. The meal simple but delicious: roast venison, potatoes, fresh bread, and an apple pie Josephine had baked the day before. As they ate, Thomas watching from a basket Owen had lined with soft blankets and placed near the table, they spoke of the future of spring plantings and summer harvests, of Thomas's first steps and words, of the family they hoped to build together. "I've been thinking," Owen said as they finished their pie, "about what you told me that first day we met. About Thomas never having been held by a man until I came along." Josephine nodded, remembering the vulnerability she had felt in sharing that fact with a stranger. "I want you to know," Owen continued, reaching across the table to take her hand, "that I'll never take for granted the trust you placed in me that day, or the gift you've given me in allowing me to be his father." Tears pricked at Josephine's eyes. "Owen, let me finish," he said gently. "I promised to hold him forever, and I meant it. But I've come to understand that it's more than just holding him. It's being there for every moment, the good and the bad, the easy and the hard. It's teaching him and learning from him. It's loving him as my own, because that's what he is now, my son, in every way that matters." Josephine's heart swelled with love for this man who had come into their lives so unexpectedly and changed everything. "You're already the best father he could ask for," she said softly. Later that night, after they had put Thomas to bed in the cradle now installed in their bedroom, Owen led Josephine to the parlor where a small evergreen tree stood in the corner, decorated with paper stars and candles. "I have something for you," he said, reaching behind the tree to retrieve a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with a red ribbon. Josephine opened it carefully to find a locket, simple but beautifully crafted in silver. When she opened it, she found a tiny lock of Thomas's downy hair on one side, and on the other, a miniature drawing of the three of them clearly commissioned from an artist in town during one of Owen's trips for supplies. "It's beautiful," she whispered, tears filling her eyes once more. "Perfect." Owen helped her fasten it around her neck, his fingers brushing her skin in a touch that sent warmth spreading through her. "A reminder," he said softly, "of what matters most." Josephine turned in his arms, raising her face to his. "I don't need reminding," she assured him, her hands coming up to frame his face. "I have everything I need right here." As the fire crackled in the hearth and snow fell gently outside the windows, Owen kissed his wife, his heart full to bursting with the miracle of the family they had become. Spring came to Blackwood Ranch in a riot of green, the creeks swollen with snow melt, wildflowers dotting the prairie in splashes of color. Thomas, now 8 months old, was crawling with determined energy, exploring every corner of the house under the watchful eyes of his parents. Owen had expanded the vegetable garden behind the house, adding rows of corn, beans, tomatoes, and Josephine's beloved sunflowers, which would bloom golden in the summer sun. The cattle herd had grown with the spring calving, and a pair of work horses now occupied the corral beside Owen's chestnut stallion. Life had settled into a rhythm that suited them all, Owen tending to the ranch with the help of a young hand he'd hired from town, Josephine managing the household and garden while caring for Thomas, both of them coming together in the evenings to share the day's events and plan for the future. One warm May evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, Thomas playing contentedly at their feet with wooden blocks Owen had carved for him, Josephine turned to her husband with a smile. "I have news," she said, her voice soft with happiness. Owen's eyebrows rose questioningly. "Good news, I hope?" Josephine nodded, taking his hand and placing it gently against her still flat stomach. "The best kind. Thomas is going to be a big brother come winter." The joy that spread across Owen's face was like nothing Josephine had ever seen, pure and unguarded. A happiness so complete it seemed to illuminate him from within. He gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. Our baby, she agreed, her heart so full it felt it might overflow. Thomas, noticing the embrace, crawled over and pulled himself up using Owen's pant leg, his little face turned up to them questioningly. Owen laughed, reaching down to lift him into their embrace. "What do you think, little man?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Ready to be a big brother?" Thomas responded with a string of babbling sounds that made them both laugh. "I'll take that as a yes," Owen said, pressing a kiss to the top of the baby's head before turning to kiss Josephine with a tenderness that made her heart ache. As the light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared above the valley, the three of them soon-to-be-four sat together on the porch of their home, bound by love and promises kept, by trust given and received, by a future unfolding before them like the endless prairie. And in that moment, Josephine knew with absolute certainty that she had found her place in the world here at Blackwood Ranch, with Owen and Thomas and the baby growing within her, with the creek and the cottonwoods and the big sky above. Here, where a chance encounter on a desperate day had led to a love stronger than she had ever imagined possible. Here, where Owen had promised to hold her son forever, and in doing so, had held her heart as well.